The silk of the wedding dress felt like a shroud against Elara's skin, heavy and suffocating, a stark contrast to the glittering opulence of the Venetian palazzo where the reception raged, a symphony of forced laughter and clinking crystal that echoed the hollowness in her chest. She stood by the arched window, the moonlight turning the Grand Canal outside into liquid silver, watching the revelers as if they were characters in a play she was condemned to star in, yet utterly detached from. This was the apex of her life, the moment society decreed she should be happiest, married to Adrian Thorne, the enigmatic, devastatingly handsome titan of global finance, whose shadow stretched further than any monarch's. But happiness was a foreign currency in this gilded cage. Adrian moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a panther, his presence instantly demanding deference, silencing trivial chatter whenever he drew near. His eyes, the color of aged whiskey under the chandeliers, sought hers across the ballroom, and when they locked, a familiar, icy tendril of fear snaked down Elara's spine. He hadn't smiled once since the vows, not genuinely, his lips curved only into expressions of calculated charm or sharp, dismissive disdain, usually directed at her when they were out of public view. Their marriage was a transaction, a calculated act of retribution. Elara knew this, understood it with a clarity that burned away all youthful illusions the moment her father, Marcus Vance, the once revered architect, had confessed the truth in a tearful, drunken whisper the night before the engagement was announced. Adrian hadn't fallen in love with her. He had fallen in love with the idea of crushing the Vance lineage, brick by painful brick, and Elara was merely the keystone of his revenge. The Vance family, for all their past prestige in the city's elite circles, had been reduced to a phantom of their former glory since the disastrous Orion Tower collapse 5 years prior, a collapse that Marcus swore was sabotage, a conspiracy he couldn't prove, costing lives and reputations. Adrian Thorne, the sole survivor and primary beneficiary of the company that had supplied the fatal structural supports, had risen meteorically from the ashes of that scandal, becoming the very power broker who now held the leash of the Vance estate, their remaining assets, and now, Elara herself. "Enjoying the view, Mrs. Thorne?" Adrian's voice was low, rough velvet barely concealing grinding steel, as he materialized silently beside her, his hand settling possessively on the small of her back, a touch that felt less like affection and more like branding. Elara flinched internally but kept her posture rigidly composed, a skill honed over the last 6 months of their engagement, preparing for this inevitable martyrdom. "It is breathtaking, Adrian. As magnificent as you planned." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Magnificence is always my goal, Elara. And you, my dear, are the crowning jewel of this particular acquisition." He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear, sending a shiver that was not entirely repulsion. "Do try to look less like a sacrificial lamb, my love. It ruins the aesthetic." "I assure you, my devotion is genuine," she lied smoothly, forcing her gaze to meet his, ensuring her eyes held the vacant devotion they demanded. She had learned early that compliance was the only shield against his harsher cruelties. Disobedience earned public humiliation or, worse, cold, calculated isolation that felt like drowning. "Good," he murmured, tightening his grip just enough to remind her of his strength. "Because you belong to me now. Your father's legacy, your mother's crumbling manor, your very breath, it's all under my control. And you are the payment." The following weeks blurred into a relentless cycle of obligation. Their penthouse atop the Thorne spire was a monument to cold, modern luxury, all glass and sharp angles, offering dizzying views but zero warmth. Adrian treated their marriage like a merger agreement. Public appearances were mandatory showcases of their unity, arm in arm at galas, posing for the relentless lens of the society photographers, while private life was structured around his exacting schedule and her duties as his impeccably groomed consort. He never touched her without malice or calculation. Their intimacy was a sterile, infrequent ritual, devoid of tenderness, designed purely to assert dominance, to remind her that her body was now his property to command, a constant, crushing reminder of her subjugation. Each morning, she woke before dawn, the silence of the vast apartment amplifying the emptiness, dressing in clothes chosen by his stylist, expensive, restrictive uniforms, before descending to the kitchen where Adrian was always already working, the glow of multiple monitors reflecting in his intense eyes. The invitations for the governor's ball need final approval, he stated one morning, not looking up, his voice already saturated with command. And Elara, ensure your mother does not attempt to contact me regarding the foreclosure notice on the upstate property. I find desperation tedious. Yes, Adrian, she whispered, her stomach clenching. Her mother had been pleading for weeks. That property was the last piece of sentimental value the Vances possessed. Tedious, he repeated, finally raising his head, fixing her with a look that seemed to strip away her facade. You understand the rules, don't you? No attachments. No weakness. You are Mrs. Thorne. You reflect my success, not your family's failures. Elara began to build defenses, invisible walls around the core of herself that Adrian hadn't managed to crush yet. She buried herself in the archives of the Thorne Corporation Library, an enormous, dimly lit room filled with leather-bound legal texts and financial reports, ostensibly to better understand his world. She told him it was to be a better hostess, a more informed wife. In reality, she was searching for the chink in his armor, the proof that his obsession with destroying her family was rooted in something more tangible than mere ambition, something she could use to bargain, or at least to understand the depth of the abyss she had fallen into. She discovered patterns in the old construction contracts, anomalies in the engineering reports predating the Orion Tower disaster. The official inquiry had been swift, citing substandard concrete mixtures supplied by a secondary contractor, but Elara noticed that the initial review board, which had cleared the primary suppliers, had been unusually composed of men with significant, undisclosed investments in companies that subsequently benefited from the resulting contracts. One late evening, while Adrian was on a transcontinental call that lasted until 3 a.m., Elara slipped into his private study, a room she was forbidden to enter without express invitation. The security system was state-of-the-art, but her father, a master of analog security systems before the digital age, had taught her tricks about bypassing obsolete fail-safes and exploiting physical weaknesses in older systems that some of Adrian's modern installations still relied upon. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she worked on the safe behind the Renoir, a masterpiece of forgery, she suspected, a safe that supposedly held the final dissolution papers for the Vance holdings. She didn't find dissolution papers. She found files labeled Orion, meticulously organized by date. These weren't standard corporate documents. They were surveillance logs, annotated private correspondence, and, most damningly, encrypted ledgers detailing payments, not payments to the faulty concrete supplier, but payments from a shell corporation tracing back, circuitously, to a rival of Marcus Vance, a man named Sterling Hayes. Hayes. The name resonated faintly from the periphery of the disaster, a minor player who had gained massive market share immediately after the Orion Tower collapsed. Elara stared at the screens of her borrowed tablet, her fingers trembling over the glowing evidence. Adrian hadn't caused the collapse, not directly. But he hadn't just benefited from it, he had actively orchestrated the cover-up, ensuring the blame landed squarely on the Vance's associates and, by extension, Marcus Vance's reputation. He had used the tragedy as leverage, a massive, bloody lever to gain access to the woman whose family he believed was responsible for some deeper, unstated offense. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Adrian wasn't just a man seeking financial dominance, he was an avenging angel cloaked in bespoke tailoring, and she was just collateral damage in a war fought long before she was born. She replaced everything exactly as it was, locking the safe with agonizing precision, and retreated to her room just as the first grey light of dawn began to infiltrate the glass walls. She hadn't found the path to freedom, but she had found a weapon, a terrible, shared secret. The tension in their marriage sharpened. Elara started subtly changing her demeanor. The vacant compliance was replaced by a quiet, almost unnerving observation. She began asking questions, veiled questions about the Orion inquiry, framed as a wife trying to educate herself on her husband's past triumphs. The sheer scale of the cover-up must have been immense, Adrian, she remarked one evening over a silent, perfectly prepared dinner. To so thoroughly discredit Marcus Vance, you must have had overwhelming evidence against him beyond that initial faulty report. Adrian paused, his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes narrowing. He studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching taut between them. Are you researching my business acumen, Elara? Only to better appreciate the magnitude of the man I married, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily, a faint, challenging light in her own eyes that hadn't been there before. It takes a particular kind of genius to weave such a complex web of misdirection. He resumed eating, but the relaxed ease had evaporated. It takes ruthlessness, Elara. A quality your father famously lacked. The next week, Adrian informed her they were attending a private, high-stakes charity auction in Geneva. It was a place where titans dealt in influence rather than currency. I want you present, attentive, and charming, he instructed. And Elara, do not speak to Sterling Hayes if you see him. At all. Hayes. The name connected to the ledger entries. Elara nodded, but a seed of dangerous curiosity had been planted. She was to be a trophy wife in a den of wolves, but now she recognized the scent of the kill. Geneva was a spectacle of muted power. Elara, draped in an emerald gown that cost more than her father's remaining salary for a year, felt the weight of Adrian's possessive gaze everywhere she went. She scanned the room, easily spotting Hayes, a man whose bland features seemed designed to be instantly forgotten, yet whose handshake with the central banker lasted a suspiciously long time. Adrian was deep in conversation with the senator when Elara saw her chance. She excused herself to the restroom, took a deep, steadying breath, and instead of turning towards the lavish powder room, she slipped down a narrow service corridor, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She found Hayes near the coat check, speaking quietly into a secure phone. When he hung up, Elara approached, her heart performing a frantic drum solo against her ribs. Mr. Hayes, she said, injecting just the right amount of social obligation into her tone. Hayes turned, his eyes flicking over her expensive attire before settling on her face, registering recognition. Mrs. Thorne. A surprise. Adrian is tied up with the senator, Elara lied smoothly, stepping closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. I wanted to congratulate you. The market shift after the Orion Tower incident was quite fortuitous for your firm, wasn't it? Hayes stiffened, the polite facade cracking slightly. Coincidence, Mrs. Thorne. Business is volatile. Of course, Elara agreed, leaning in as if to share a private joke. But I've always been fascinated by coincidences that line up so neatly with certain leveraged buyouts. Especially when one considers the initial contractual negotiations leading up to that disaster involved your previous competitor, who conveniently went bankrupt shortly before the collapse. Hayes's composure shattered. His eyes darted around the corridor. What are you implying, Elara? I'm implying I'm tired of being the silent partner in my husband's vendetta, she countered, her voice losing its veneer of politeness, sharpened now by genuine desperation and nascent courage. I know he's built his empire on the wreckage of the Orion Tower, and I know he used the subsequent panic to systematically dismantle my family. But I also know you were the necessary grease in the machine, Mr. Hayes. Tell me why Adrian needs your silence so badly. What did he promise you? Or perhaps, what did he threaten you with? Hayes laughed, a short, brittle sound. Threaten me? Adrian Thorne threatens everyone, dear girl. But if you think uncovering some dusty old conspiracy will save you, you're mistaken. Adrian didn't just want your father ruined, he wanted Vance's soul. And he found the key to unlocking it 5 years before you were even engaged. What key? Elara pressed, feeling a cold dread supersede her earlier triumph. The key to why Marcus Vance was working on the Orion Tower in the first place, Hayes hissed, gripping her wrist suddenly, his touch repulsive. It wasn't just a commercial project. It was Marcus's redemption. The tower was supposed to be the pinnacle of his career, funded by private investors, investors who were deeply connected to the man who bankrupted Adrian's father a decade ago. Adrian didn't just want revenge on Vance for the collapse, he wanted revenge on Vance for building the structure that would have, eventually, ruined the man who ruined Adrian's father first. Elara felt the world tilt. The revenge was layered, a Russian doll of retribution. Adrian's hatred wasn't just about a failed building contract, it was about ancestral slights, a complex, multi-generational blood feud where Marcus Vance was merely the most convenient pawn. Adrian Thorne is a psychopath who weaponized tragedy, Hayes concluded, releasing her wrist with a shove. And you, Elara, are the trophy wife of the victor. Now, leave me alone before the victor notices his prized possession wandering the corridors. Elara stumbled back, the emerald dress suddenly feeling like lead weights. She hadn't just found evidence against Adrian, she had found the entire dark, convoluted motive structure underlying their entire, agonizing marriage. When she returned to the main hall, Adrian was scanning the room, his jaw tight. He saw her, and the tension visibly bled from his shoulders, replaced by a dangerously smooth affection as he crossed the room to take her arm. "Where were you, Elara?" His voice was low, laced with an implied threat that belied the gentle way his fingers brushed her elbow. Admiring the early Renaissance tapestries in the adjoining gallery, she lied, injecting a convincing blush into her cheeks. They were quite absorbing. He held her gaze, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. He didn't believe her, she knew. He just didn't care enough at that moment to dissect the lie further, provided she was back under his arm. They returned to New York 3 days later, the atmosphere between them heavier than ever. Elara knew she couldn't confront him with the fragments she possessed, he would crush her before she could articulate the full extent of his machinations. She had to find the rest of the evidence, the proof that connected Adrian directly to manipulating Hayes and funding the initial sabotage that led to the faulty concrete, the chain of command that went straight to the top, Adrian Thorne. She started diverting massive amounts of her own dwindling allowance, funneled through an obscure offshore account her mother used for charity work, an account Adrian hadn't bothered to monitor closely since he controlled the principal assets. She hired a discreet, former cybersecurity specialist who owed her father a long-forgotten favor. The instructions were simple: deep dive into the communications network of Sterling Hayes for the period leading up to the Orion collapse. The waiting was torture. Every shared meal felt like a performance, every shared space, a potential trap. Adrian began to notice her renewed focus. He saw the flicker of intellect behind her eyes, the alertness that hadn't been present during the honeymoon phase of her despair. "You seem restless, Elara," he observed one evening as she pretended to read an architect's journal while covertly monitoring encrypted messages from her hidden burner phone. "Just the city air," she murmured, looking up with a practiced, weary smile. "It lacks the subtlety of Venice." He walked around the desk, placing a hand on her shoulder, his touch heavy and possessive. "Subtlety is weakness, Elara. I prefer transparency. And I prefer knowing exactly what occupies my wife's mind." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Don't test the boundaries I've drawn for you. I built this life farce, a fortress against the ghosts of your family's incompetence. Do not mistake my control for lack of vigilance." The threat resonated, but something had shifted in Elara. Fear was still present, a cold knot, but it was now mingled with a hard, resilient anger. She was tired of being a ghost in her own life. A week later, the specialist delivered. The encrypted files confirmed Hayes's complicity, but more importantly, they detailed payments funneled through a shell company named Gilded Holdings, a company registered in the Cayman Islands, which, after 3 layers of obfuscation, led directly back to a primary asset fund managed exclusively by Adrian Thorne. Adrian hadn't just covered up the crime, he had masterminded the entire scenario to ensure Marcus Vance was not just ruined, but ethically obliterated, all while positioning himself as the stabilizing force who swooped in to save the market. The revenge wasn't just about his father, it was about proving himself superior to the generation of architects and builders who had indirectly caused his own childhood trauma. Elara felt a surge of chilling clarity. She had the evidence. This was her moment. She waited until Adrian left for a 3-day summit in Davos. The penthouse felt enormous, silent, and suddenly full of possibility. She took the physical drive containing the full, damning chain of evidence and secured it in a nondescript backpack, along with her passport and the small amount of untraceable cash she had managed to squirrel away. Leaving Adrian Thorne's empire was not as simple as walking out the door. He had monitors on everything, her car, her phone, her digital footprint. But he hadn't accounted for her father's old-fashioned ingenuity. Elara left via the service elevator, dressed in drab maintenance overalls she found in a supply closet, carrying a toolbox that concealed her burner phone and the evidence. She walked out the underground loading dock, hailed a taxi, not from the usual company, but a random one waiting for a delivery, and disappeared into the labyrinthine streets of Manhattan before the automated security sweep registered her absence. She didn't go to her mother. That was the first place Adrian would look. Instead, she flew immediately to London, the financial hub furthest removed from Adrian's immediate sphere of influence, and sought out the only person she knew who possessed the resources and moral flexibility to fight a man like Adrian Thorne, Marcus Vance's disgraced former business partner, Arthur Pendleton, who had been publicly blackballed by Thorne 5 years prior. Pendleton lived in a small, elegant townhouse in Kensington, far from the opulence he once commanded. He was drinking whiskey in the late afternoon when Elara knocked, unannounced, looking nothing like the glamorous Mrs. Thorne. Elara. Pendleton squinted, instantly recognizing her but bewildered by her attire and obvious distress. "What in God's name, Adrian let you out of his sight?" "He doesn't know I'm here," Elara said, stepping inside, the smell of old leather and stale ambition enveloping her. "I need your help, Arthur. I need you to help me destroy him." She laid out the entire narrative, the Orion file, the ledgers, the connection to Hayes, and the overarching motive rooted in the feud between their fathers. Pendleton listened, his expression shifting from disbelief to grim satisfaction. "So, the monster built his throne on a lie," Pendleton muttered, pouring her a glass of water instead of the whiskey he was contemplating. Marcus Vance was truly a fool to trust the old guard, but Adrian is a viper. "Can you break him?" Elara asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "Can you use this evidence to expose the manipulation, the cover-up, the bribery?" "It's strong, Elara, very strong," Pendleton confirmed, carefully examining the encrypted files on a secure terminal. "But Adrian Thorne doesn't just control the financial markets, he owns regulators, judges, and key journalists. Taking him down legally will be like fighting a hydra. He'll spin it as a disgruntled wife fabricating evidence due to marital strife." "Then we don't go legal first," Elara said, leaning over the desk, the desperation hardening into resolve. "We go public. We leak every verifiable piece of evidence to every reputable investigative outlet simultaneously. We flood the market with the truth, and we use the chaos to leverage the regulatory bodies he controls." Pendleton raised an eyebrow, a flicker of the old fire returning to his eyes. "You are Anya Vance's daughter, after all. Ruthless when cornered. I like it." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings, secure data transfers, and strategic leaks. Elara coordinated the information release from a safe house Pendleton maintained in rural Surrey, cutting all digital ties to her previous life. When the first major exposé dropped, a front-page spread in the Financial Times detailing the Eaglet Holdings link to the Orion cover-up, the world erupted. Thorne Industries stock immediately plummeted. Adrian Thorne, who had been enjoying the Davos summit, was abruptly recalled to New York, his security detail suddenly overwhelmed by protesters and aggressive reporters camped outside the spire. Elara watched the news coverage from Surrey, gripping the edge of the cheap wooden table. Adrian's face, usually so perfectly composed, was contorted with cold fury as he issued a brief, aggressive statement denying everything. But Elara hadn't stopped there. She used the final piece of leverage, a private, highly compromising communication between Adrian and Hayes regarding the disposal of key physical evidence, which she had only managed to extract after Pendleton used a sophisticated social engineering attack against Hayes's personal assistant. The second wave of leaks hit 48 hours later, aimed directly at the character of Adrian Thorne himself, evidence that suggested not just corporate malfeasance, but deep-seated patterns of predatory behavior extending beyond the Orion case, hinting at things he had buried long ago. The fallout was catastrophic. Regulators launched immediate investigations. His board members, terrified of personal liability, began demanding his resignation. Adrian Thorne was hemorrhaging power faster than he could sign emergency divestiture papers. It was on the fourth day, after the initial shockwave had passed and the stock was in freefall, that Elara received the call. It wasn't a threat, nor was it a summons. It was a desperate, halting plea from a burner phone Pendleton had assured her was untraceable. Elara. Don't hang up. Adrian's voice. It was different. The polished veneer was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged sound she had never associated with him. He sounded broken, stripped bare. What is it, Adrian? Elara kept her voice neutral, professional, the voice of a CEO discussing a hostile takeover target. Stop it, he pleaded. Just stop. I'll resign. I'll sign over every asset traceable to the Orion scandal. I'll finance the Vance Foundation in perpetuity. I'll give you your family name back. Just call Pendleton. Make him halt the final disclosure. The final disclosure is set for tomorrow morning, Adrian. It details the premeditated ruination of my family, based on a grudge you harbored for years over a tragedy you initiated. There was a long, agonizing silence on the line, punctuated only by Adrian's ragged breathing. It wasn't just about my father, Elara, he finally choked out. His voice cracked, and for the first time, Elara heard something beneath the rage and the ambition, profound, ancient pain. It wasn't just about the money or the business. It was about Anya. Elara froze. Anya Vance, her mother. What about my mother? Your mother, she destroyed my father, Adrian whispered, the confession tearing out of him. When I was 10. My father, a good man, a decent builder, he was struggling. He had secured the contract for the Henderson complex, a massive project. Marcus Vance, your father, was his partner, his supposed friend. But Vance undercut him, used inside information to sabotage the financing bids at the last minute, took the contract, and left my father utterly ruined. My father never recovered. He drank himself to death within a year. Anya Vance, your mother, she was at the celebration dinner when Vance secured the deal. She toasted Marcus, laughing, calling my father a relic of an obsolete generation. Elara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her mother, the gentle, melancholic woman she knew, capable of quiet sorrows, possessed a capacity for viciousness she had never suspected. She had always protected her mother, seen her as the victim of Marcus's professional failures, never a participant in the destruction of another family. That was the beginning of the war, Adrian continued, his voice gaining a terrible momentum, fueled by years of buried trauma. I swore I would never be weak. When the Orion opportunity came, and I saw the chance to take down the entire Vance structure, to make Marcus Vance feel the gut-wrenching loss that my father felt when he looked at his empty drawing board, I took it. I planned it for years. And when I met you, Elara, I saw the perfect instrument. The ultimate, intimate destruction. He paused, and when he spoke again, the coldness was back, but infused with a terrible, desperate longing. I married you to hurt you, yes. I intended to use you as the final executioner of your family's honor. But somewhere along the way, Elara, somewhere between the control and the cruelty, I couldn't stop seeing you. You are brilliant, tenacious, and you fight even when you are bleeding. You are everything I never allowed myself to be. I tried to crush you, Elara, because I believed you were the inheritor of your mother's carelessness. But you are not Anya Vance. You are better. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument they'd ever had. Elara sat back, breathing shallowly, grappling with the monstrous tapestry of their shared history. Her mother had been the catalyst for Adrian's war, and Adrian had waged that war by destroying her father and now, by systematically dismantling her life. You admit it, Adrian, Elara finally said, her voice trembling, betraying the composure she desperately tried to maintain. You admit you married me for revenge. Yes, he admitted instantly, without evasion. The word hung in the air, undeniable. I admit it. But my confession doesn't change the outcome now, Elara. Pendleton's leaks will destroy me, yes, but they will also expose your mother's role in destroying my father. Your family will be ruined by association, even if Marcus is cleared of the murder charge. You will be collateral damage in the scorched earth. I don't care about Marcus's reputation anymore, Elara retorted fiercely. I only care about surviving you. Survival means stopping the final disclosure, Adrian urged, his tone desperate. I can manage the fallout. I can ensure your family escapes with their dignity intact, what little is left. But if you release that last file, the true extent of the conspiracy, the involvement of the original investors who funded Vance's sabotage of my father, the resulting investigations will drag everyone down, including your mother. I promised myself I would never hurt Anya Vance again, Elara, but if you force my hand, I will protect myself, and that means protecting the narrative that condemns her. He had weaponized her mother's past against her present. He knew exactly where her loyalties, however damaged, lay. What do you want? Elara whispered, her resolve wavering under the sheer weight of this revelation. I want you to walk away from Pendleton. I want you to come back, Adrian pleaded. The formality was gone. It was just a man, stripped of his billions and his empire, begging for the one thing he hadn't been able to acquire through coercion or conquest. I cannot function without you in my periphery, Elara. If you leave now, you destroy the only purpose I've had since I was 10 years old, the purpose of conquering everything you represented. If you go, I have nothing left to fight for. He was offering her peace, but only on the condition that she remained tethered to him, accepting his twisted form of existence. Elara looked out the window of the safe house. The English countryside was lush, green, and utterly indifferent to the wreckage of the Thorne Empire. She had fought for weeks to escape the control, only to find that the control was a mirror reflecting a cycle of reciprocal destruction. You are asking me to choose between your downfall and my mother's exposure, Elara stated flatly. You are still commanding me, Adrian. I am begging you not to leave me alone in the ruins, he cried out, the sound echoing with genuine anguish. I am offering you control, Elara. If you come back, I will sign over complete autonomy. You will run the foundation, you will manage the cleanup, you will dictate the narrative of my retreat. I will become a shadow, legally constrained, financially neutered, but present enough to keep the wolves at bay until you are safe. I cannot lose you, Elara. I destroyed everything else, but I cannot face the silence without you. He was offering her the keys to the cage, allowing her to become the warden, but she would still be trapped within the structure he built. And if I refuse? Elara asked, testing the final boundary. Adrian gave a hollow, defeated laugh. Then I lose the only piece of genuine light I've ever known. And Elara, don't know what that broken man will do next. Perhaps he'll turn the final disclosures onto the regulators themselves. Perhaps he'll burn the whole city down just to spite the ashes. Elara leaned her head against the cool glass. The choice was not between freedom and imprisonment, but between two kinds of captivity. If she stayed, she would be eternally bound to a man who loved her only after he had tried to destroy her, a relationship based on shared trauma and twisted dependency. If she left, she risked unleashing a final, destructive act of vengeance against her own mother. She closed her eyes, remembering the cold weight of the wedding ring, the sterile touch, the calculated disdain. She remembered the thrill of uncovering the truth, the surge of defiant purpose in London. Pendleton releases the final files tomorrow morning, Adrian, Elara said, her voice steadying, steel returning to her spine. If you want to save your narrative, you have until sunrise to publicly release a detailed statement accepting full responsibility for the Orion Tower scandal, dissolving Thorne Industries, and publicly announcing your intent to withdraw from all business dealings indefinitely, citing personal health reasons. And the final disclosures? Adrian urged, hope threading through his broken tone. They stay sealed, Elara stipulated. For now. But if I see one indication that you are attempting to manipulate the investigations, or if I hear of any retaliation against my family, however tangentially related, I will personally ensure those files are delivered to the International Criminal Court. You will be finished, Adrian. Truly finished. There was a pause. Elara imagined him in the penthouse, perhaps pacing the floor, the city lights mocking his fallen status. And you, Elara, he asked, his voice barely a breath. Where will you be? Elara looked down at her hands, remembering the feel of the rough overalls, the quiet anonymity of the English countryside. She thought of the sterile beauty of the Thorne spire and the crushing weight of being Mrs. Thorne. I will be gone, she stated. I will use the remaining assets you signed over to Pendleton to quietly rebuild what my father lost, not out of duty, but because it is what I was meant to do. I will build something real, Adrian. Something that doesn't require a sacrifice to exist. She heard a choked sob on the line, a sound so alien, so pathetic, that it banished the last vestige of residual fear she held for him. This was the sound of the monster dying, not by her hand, but by the sheer exhaustion of his own unsustainable malice. Don't leave me entirely, Adrian pleaded one last time, the true meaning of his marriage laid bare. She was the anchor to the man he could have been, the victim who chose empathy over vengeance. I need to know I can come to you when this is over. That you won't let me disappear into nothing. Elara looked at the setting sun washing the English hills in gold. She had won the war, but the spoils were not romantic reconciliation. They were hard-won boundaries and the right to walk away clean. I will not be your warden, Adrian. I will not be your penance, she said, her voice firm but devoid of cruelty. I am Elara Vance, and I am free. You made your choices, and you paid the price for them. Do not mistake my mercy for a return ticket. With that, Elara hung up the phone. She didn't wait for his final plea or his forced compliance. She walked to the door, picked up the small, worn suitcase Pendleton had arranged for her, and stepped out into the clean, open air, leaving behind the silence of the ruined man who had once owned her world, the echoes of his desperate confession fading into the vast, indifferent landscape of her new, hard-earned solitude. The gilded cage was shattered, and finally, Elara could breathe.